No. Okay. You can't.
Go ahead.
Like if something unexpected happens, like my mother-in-law comes in here because she's curious about how this all works, and you guys can edit stuff out, right?
That would probably be the best thing that's happened to this show.
We can, but we don't usually edit embarrassing things out.
Good to know. All right.
Yeah.
We have a producer. His name is Jeremiah. He's a wonderful human, and he's actually a good friend of mine. And so, I think he's my good friend. I don't know. He maybe doesn't like me too much, but he goes through and he cleans this up. He's actually gone through and fixed pronunciations of some of Matthew's words before, because he can surgically repair words. He's a really smart guy.
I don't know how to say a lot of words in the English language. So it's a struggle, but no. Yeah, he's great. So, but we tend to like to keep embarrassing things in for our guests.
Great.
So, yeah. And this is all audio. No one can see the video.
I just always come on assuming that I'm going to get punked. So you just, that's sort of, part of the assumption.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So today we have Elizabeth Keys and Austin Kocher. Am I saying it right? Kocher.
No, it's Kocher.
I know.
Right
you know what? I overthought it. I'm like, I want to say Kocher. I'm like Kocher, and I'm like, okay, then so.
It's one of those hard to pronounce foreign names, and it's hard.
Yeah, it's okay. And I'm Matthew Archambault. There you go. I pronounced my last name wrong on purpose, so we can
even the playing field
commiserate. Yeah. Elizabeth is assistant professor at University of Baltimore Law School. Is that right?
That's associate professor. These things matter.
Associate professor. Austin's an assistant professor over at Syracuse. So is associate or assistant? Which one's better?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
We should give more heft to.
Yeah, I'm an assistant.
Right, but is that like
associate?
We have to rank these things.
We're not playing into this hierarchy of yours.
Which one is more powerful is what we're asking. Which one of you wields more power?
No, we do play in the hierarchy.
I have no power.
Okay, they're not going to answer, Matthew. I don't even know why we have.
Elizabeth is a law professor, so she professes on law.
I do profess.
And Austin is a geography professor, so he talks about maps, which I don't even know why it's anymore. We have Google Maps now. I mean, I thought it would be kind of obsolete, but apparently it's not.
Yeah.
But also Austin, he helps with a TRAC program at Syracuse, and he does a lot of immigration data and all that. So he's pretty good. And he's also a Democratic voter. So he's been on some NBC thing as a Democratic voter. So he's been labeled, and that's why we asked him on, because he's a Democratic voter. Now, it has nothing to do with his expertise in immigration and the such. So
right. I love the introduction is Austin Kocher helps with TRAC. Democratic voter.
Yep.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Austin, because the last time we had you on was a while ago, and talk a little bit about TRAC and what it is that you guys do because we have a lot of new listeners. So
we do?
I'm surprised.
Yeah, we do.
It's weird.
Nobody's more surprised than this guy. But what is TRAC and what is it that you guys are trying to do?
Yeah. So TRAC has been around for 30 years, and we use Freedom of Information Act requests and litigation to get records from the federal government to provide the public with insight about how the government is doing its work. And one of our main areas is immigration. So we just get data from the federal government. We kind of clean it up, make sure it's right. It's not always right. And we make it available to the public so that anybody, regardless of party or affiliation or whatever, can go in and see, how many people are being deported, how many people are being arrested by ICE and so forth. And I think that's an important public service for journalists and policymakers and the public and academics and all that stuff. So it's a lot of fun. I love my job.
The last time we talked to you, we went over some of the challenges that were Trump related in terms of like responding to FOIAs and sort of the open dialogue with the agency, mostly with the DOJ, UIR, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that Biden is elected and everything is fixed, doesn't that sort of mean there's not much work for you to do? Hasn't it fixed everything?
Oh, it's so easy. Everything is fixed. It's been awesome. Let me tell you. Yeah, everything is awesome.
I think they like proactively just like send you this stuff now.
Oh, they reach out and say thank you.
We know you're going to ask for it. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so that sounded like maybe it was sarcasm. Has there been any changes so far?
No.
On the kinds of things that you guys are, the challenges that you see?
No. In fact, it's gotten worse in at least one regard. the Executive Office for Immigration Review that runs the immigration courts is now refusing to tell us what things they are redacting from the records they're sending us. So that means this is against the law, of course. You're required to indicate what you're redacting if you redact information that's requested through FOIA. So now we have, in addition to some leftover issues that haven't been resolved with the Trump administration, this is still going on with the courts. ICE has been refusing for several years now to even search for records that we ask for. They provided them to us for 5, 6, 7 years. They stopped doing that about 3 years ago and have continued to refuse to do so. So that represents yet another legal issue that we're going to have to figure out how to tackle. So unfortunately not. Yeah.
Are you expecting things to change? Because I still have this little thing in the back of my head and it's slowly being crushed out. It's called hope. And
crush it. Let go of the misery. Right? Crush it already.
Okay. Are you guys like waiting for the thing to kick in, or are you just sort of like, it's just going to be a continuation, at least in what you do, of the policies from the last 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting about immigration, as you both know, and is a little bit similar to like Freedom of Information Act work, is it does not break down by party lines very well, or even by administration. And so there were a lot of things that the Obama administration did that were not helpful at all on transparency. That policy I just mentioned was implemented during the Obama administration, where ICE started withholding information that we were asking for. Certainly the Trump administration created new issues, but, I'm public about some of my political opinions. But, when it comes down to it, obviously, I am absolutely, resolutely nonpartisan. I'm not even bipartisan. I'm nonpartisan, for the reason that neither party, when they are able to make meaningful changes and when they have the ability to do so, when they have power in Congress and the White House, just don't seem to be interested in fixing either government transparency issues or immigration issues, broadly speaking. So, yeah, different administration, same issues. I would like to think Joe Biden did indicate that he was interested in making improvements to transparency when the Attorney General, now Attorney General, was sitting for his confirmation hearing. Actually, in his letter ahead of time, Merrick Garland mentioned issues about transparency at the agency. So we'd love to see that happen, maybe, change our minds, but we haven't seen it yet.
I mean, has there ever been an Attorney General or president who has come out for like more lack of transparency, though?
Anti-transparency.
It seems like one of those like throwaway lines, like you have to say, but
yeah.
But this time we mean it.
Now, Liz, did you come on to also just rain on my day? I said I had some hope, and you said I should crush it. I mean, what is that? What is that all about?
Yeah,
somebody's got to make me happy here.
I'm sorry. I just want to be really pleasantly shocked when the good things happen instead of sort of holding out for them.
That's a good,
come by my
idea.
Pessimism really honestly, because I had a hope in 2006. It was a while ago when it seemed like there might be immigration reform around the corner, and the big rallies were all happening. And, my daughter was born.
Just a huge corner.
Yeah, my daughter was born. So I thought I was going to miss out on immigration reform because I was busy having my daughter literally went into labor at one of the rallies, and she's 15. So yeah, hope. I'm not on good terms with hope. Sorry, Stephen.
All right. Well, that'll do it for this week.
So Liz, as a professor, though, when you're teaching about immigration law, do you crush your students' souls the first day of class, or do you want to build up to it?
I let the law do it to them. No, the thing that does, the thing that does give me hope is the students who are horrified by what they learn in immigration law. And again, that's the subject matter itself. I actually avoid some of the topics that I find kind of personally hardest and most grueling, but they learn about the history. They learn about, ways the system doesn't work today. And then a lot of them have energy to go out and do something about it. And it's being in the room, literally in the room with that kind of energy of students who are smart and capable and determined does give me hope. So there you go, Stephen. There's some hope for you.
All right. That made me feel pretty good. So Matthew, did you want to talk about something in particular, or?
Not really. No, it's just ramble.
I mean, I'm in the same position. Just with students, I think it is a balance. It's a hard thing to know how to handle communicating, how sort of dire and tragic the immigration system can be. Students in my geographies of migration course run into the same issue. And I'm always really trying to balance exposing students to the reality of how migration controls work around the world, not just in the United States, but in Europe, in the Mediterranean, the Rohingya crisis in Southeast Asia, how Australia has outsourced its migration controls to different islands. So, trying to expose students, and I really try to be very thoughtful about not overwhelming them, not traumatizing or re-traumatizing them with too many heartbreaking stories. But, I do check in with them. And one of the things that they say is that, yes, this is hard to handle. These are new stories, and it's hard to understand something beyond the headlines where you're really getting some really good firsthand stories. And they do say that it's difficult to watch and to understand, but they also articulate a kind of empowerment when you do understand something and you can start to relate to real people who are going through migration, the refugee process, that there is a sense of empowerment that comes with the knowledge. And that does give me hope.
One thing we talked about last week was the sort of lack of focus on the other side of this debate. On the one side, there's a very clear message. It's build that wall. It's 3 words. It's a good chant, right? It's got a good cadence to it.
Stephen often does that at home when he's working out. He's like lifting, he's bench pressing. He's like, build that wall. And he thinks a wall of it as his chest. He's pretty impressive.
During the government furlough, 2017, 18, I forget when, or 2020, I don't remember. There have been so many.
During one of the years.
My husband, who works on the field of immigration, built 3 walls while he wasn't going to work. So
yeah,
it was a chant in our house too.
Build that wall. So it's very clear, and they've got think tanks, they've got hate groups, they're all working together. And on the left, it's this sort of like, what if we had
more visas?
What are those bumper stickers with all the different religious symbols on them?
Coexist.
Coexist?
Coexist. Yeah. What if we all got like coexist stickers on our Priuses? And, we should probably be nice to immigrants. That's sort of like the extent of the policy thinking, it seems like sometimes. And Austin, I know I'm oversimplifying, but I'm wondering, in studying the systems, the way things work other places, if there's something you think we could learn from how people are doing things outside of this country.
Yeah, I mean, that's
does everybody just get this wrong everywhere, and we're just another kind of terrible?
Both. Both. I mean, people do get it wrong everywhere because, it's not often part of the public debate, but just remember, like 300 years ago, 200 years ago, there were no such thing as a global border control, migration control system. The vast parts of the entire world outside of little bits of Europe had nothing that we would even recognize as a border, much less the kind of militarized border walls of steel and concrete and fencing that we see today. This is a really recent phenomenon, but it's one that is specifically associated with the evolution of the nation state, the territorial nation state system. So in some senses, it is inherent to the way that society has organized itself politically over the last 150, 200 years. So in a way, it's endemic, and everybody gets it wrong because in this globe now, borders are getting more and more militarized and more hardened. At the same time, yeah, I think there are other examples. I think there are, Europe has certainly experimented in many ways with trying to reduce border controls as they have tried to integrate economically. That system is definitely troubled at this point because of recent politics around recent refugee arrivals. But for a good 30 years, there's been, substantial reduction in border controls as they integrated economically. There were proposals to do that when the United States signed NAFTA with Canada and Mexico. There were proposals at the time to integrate in terms of migration, but that was stopped for the reasons that Matthew said, which are, longstanding prejudiced lobbying groups that are funded by hate groups and historically prejudiced funders and things like that. So I do think that the United States is somewhat unique, but it is also a global crisis. So it is a little bit of both. But at the same time, I mean, most people who migrate, most refugees in the world don't go to the United States or Europe. They go to other countries in the global South. And in fact, many countries in the global South, there are grassroots efforts to work together to integrate, to figure things out in a way that's not so structured by, I think of Colombia taking in the refugees from Venezuela, just opening the borders. Colombia is still a country. It's doing just fine. Germany welcomed over.
No, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country. Okay?
Right. I mean, Germany took in 1 million refugees in a year. It's still the wealthiest country in Europe. It still has all of the political power and all of, what it had. It was not undermined.
But that sounds super scary though, right? Admit it. Super scary.
It sounds scary if you're scared of brown and black people, I guess.
One place we do have it going right is the United States. And I don't mean our external border. I mean the 50 states and DC. And I've been thinking a lot lately because I've been working on climate migration about the Dust Bowl. And when land was degraded, people went west. Why'd they go west? Because their parents or cousins or friends were in California. It's a migrant story. It's a migrant story. It just happens to be within the US. And you think, okay, right. No tensions there. We're all Americans. Well, not always. Back then, California literally put up bum blockades at the border to turn around what was then pejoratively the Okies. It was treated as a migration issue. And the Supreme Court eventually landed on saying, look, we're all in this together. If being a country means anything, it means states can't put up borders against other states. Did the world fall apart? No. And within a generation, the Okies were doing great and sort of claiming Okiness with pride in California, turning it Republican in the process.
Well, I mean, I think Oklahoma still sucks, actually.
I have friends who live in Oklahoma who might partially disagree. But
I've never been there, but
like Hurricane Maria, people came to the mainland. Hurricane Katrina, people went from New Orleans to Houston. The world does not end when people are able to migrate.
So one of my biggest influences in becoming an immigration attorney is The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck, which talks exactly what Liz was talking about. And if you read it, if you substitute the Jodes for, say the Gomez's, right? And say they're, instead of being from Oklahoma, they're from Mexico, we can see the exact same treatment that they received. So it was really kind of eye-opening. And it is true, like even today, even just moving from, if you want to move from New Jersey because you don't like the taxes, you can move down to Delaware. No one blinks an eye. Or if you want to move from Delaware to New Jersey because we actually have better schools and services here, no one blinks an eye.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
But the thing is, if you want to move from Mexico, Guatemala, wherever to the United States, the thought is, well, you can't do that because now you're going to be tapping into our resources that are only for us. And it is, I think Liz is exactly right. Like, where can we have an example of open borders that works? And it's right here in the United States. So I do think that's something that we should maybe better messaging on. But, Stephen's right. It's easy to give out simple messages that are kind of backed by hate just because they're simple, and a more nuanced message of perhaps we should have open borders. And then you get into, well, what does open borders mean? Right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And then, you'll have 50 people who agree with open borders and you'll have 75 different opinions.
Yeah.
Build the wall is, and keep people out is pretty easy to message.
Yeah. Do you think open borders is useful rhetorically? Are we too scared of our shadow, or is there a better way to frame the conversation? Do you think?
I'm not sure, but it strikes me as a little bit like defund the police, which it's going to get people's backs up and like quickly. And yet there's a conversation happening maybe because defund the police is such a sort of jarring phrase. And people say, well, what does it mean? And so you actually can get into a little bit of the nuance. Admittedly, I live in a bubble, so maybe that's not happening across the board. But it's amazing how defensive you feel even just tiptoeing toward open borders. You're a lunatic. Whenever I write about stuff in law reviews, I'm always sort of saying, I understand the political, pragmatic argument for borders. I understand this is not going to happen next year, but I still think it's important to say and start building out some of that nuance.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Austin, in the historical context, you're saying that the borders as we know today are pretty recent inventions. Do you think there's anything we can learn by, say, how nation states were run in the 15th century and going back to those time periods?
Yeah. I mean, some of the case law that our immigration law that we love to bash is based on, comes out of that period, and sort of laws about sojourners and their rights. And, the sense of who is part of the community was so much more fluid than anything we've got going today.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think it's hard to look for examples in the past just because the conditions are quite different. But I do find it's very productive to remind people in terms of setting the tone of the conversation that borders are such a recent creation. We didn't have comprehensive immigration policy till about 100 years ago. We had the Chinese Exclusion Acts, an explicitly racist immigration policy that set most of the foundation in the 1880s. That's just not that long ago. And I think, when thinking about like what things could look like in the future, it's so interesting to me from a philosophical perspective. Like when who's the Tesla guy? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Like Elon Musk can talk about, setting up communities on Mars, and people are like, oh, what a vision for the future. But we talk about like, what if there is a future where we don't have borders in the way that they look like today? And people act like that's, off, like using imagination for creating something in the future and setting out a vision that seems difficult to accomplish, but that is possible if we set the conditions for it and work together. That is the basis of innovation. And there's no reason why that process of innovation can't also apply to human society and political organization, except that people get very entrenched in the thinking of borders and the way that things work now. And a lot of that, as race scholars have illuminated for decades, it's because people benefit from the way that things are organized now. Some people benefit from having different kinds of implicit or explicit racial exclusions. People have anxiety about how America is changing, which is usually code for there's a lot more people who don't look like me on TV. It's not even in their neighborhoods very many times. It's just like there's this idea.
Right.
And so I think that the challenge is, how do we overcome prejudice and how do we build empathy in to our vision and our innovation for what society could look like in the future?
Yeah. People are like, I'm not a racist. I'm just concerned with demographic shifts. Like the language is just.
I mean, Tucker Carlson just had a little thing where he was mocking Joe Biden for saying January 6th was the biggest attack on our democracy in 180 years or whatever it was. And he said, hasn't he ever heard of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, which opened up immigration to more non-white people? He basically said it was a Democratic ploy to get more Democratic voters. Isn't that an attack on our democracy? When it was widely supported by Republicans at the time. But I mean, one thing is Trump came by and he really exposed a lot of the racism and bigotry, kind of came out, kind of bubbled up to the surface. And you would have thought once he left, maybe it would start going back down. But it's obvious now that I think we're even starting to see more of it. And I think in a way it's helpful for the conversation because they can stop hiding behind environmental concerns at the border or these, economic things that they're taking their jobs. And let's get really down to the core, as what Austin's saying, is they don't like non-white people. So It's ugly, but I think it helps us with our arguments, honestly.
The mask is off, and maybe that gives us a chance to change the conversation. But yeah, no, you guys talked last week about
literally and metaphorically.
Yeah. No, exactly.
People aren't wearing masks, is what I'm saying.
Oh,
it's a COVID-related joke for people who will be listening to this in 5 or 6
It's not going to make sense. Yes. People listening to this in a year, catching up with all of the back episodes, are not going to get that.
What was I going to say? I got distracted by COVID.
That we were talking about
last week and a little bit earlier today too, that, we're just not thinking big about what we want. I think, Stephen, you joked about, like, can we just get one BIA decision reversed? And I have my candidate. But I think part of the reason why we don't have a huge infrastructure and a simple, clear message and a lot of nuance on a bold vision is that we are so busy picking all those little fights, which are of urgent need to our clients today, that it's hard to sort of step back and look at, what could be, because the attacks are just so endless and on every front, on stupid fronts. So I think that really diminishes kind of the creative energy around some of these issues on the sort of pro-immigrant side.
Yeah, definitely.
I would also add to that, I think there's a little bit of analysis that I sort of formed by doing some grassroots work with immigrant rights and worker rights issues. And one of the things I realized going from kind of being involved in immigrant rights issues and then working a little bit with organized labor was it really clued me into the fact that the immigrant rights side of things, whatever that means, is so under-resourced because the sort of political economy around how you fund things like this is really, really underdeveloped. And there's just a lot of disincentives. I mean, there's not a clear economic incentive that might drive that in a way that there are other areas of advocacy where, like organized labor or other things where, really advocating for more of something generates a kind of pipeline for ongoing support. And, on the right, there's so much money that is put into anti-immigrant kinds of policies and lobbying because there's so many people that support those policies. But how do you build an infrastructure around immigrant rights organizing at a national level that can actually develop messaging where there's kind of some consensus that develops a kind of pipeline for people who can go into policy? And when, on the right, you get a position at ICE, and when you're done, you go work for CIS or FAIR or something. You go work for one of the Tanton groups. And if a Republican gets in office again, then you can go back and you can rotate into an agency position. That doesn't really exist except for a few organizations, very few organizations in the immigrant rights world. And I don't know how you build that. I know people are trying, but I think that's one of the sort of contextual factors.
Yeah.
And immigration attorneys are generally not very wealthy. So, we don't have those big donors like you'll have in those other areas. So, except for Stephen. Stephen does amazingly well.
I charge for my time. Okay.
Well, this comes out of the work that I did with immigration attorneys too. Like that was really illuminating because I realized, if you're doing white collar criminal defense or some other area of law, what are you winning when you win a case? You're winning wealthy clients for a lifetime. You're winning potentially financial, monetary damages of some kind. There's other things that allow those practices to go forward. But what do you win when you win a case in immigration? Someone can stay. What is that? You don't win any money. There's no financial.
Sometimes you get some tacos.
You get invited to like a really cool carne asada at the park with all the family.
True.
There's benefit.
That's better. I'm not.
I got a tub of mango sticky rice once.
But you
exactly.
But you see that there's not, even within immigration lawyering, there's the economics of it function differently than other areas of law.
I reached out to a colleague who had really inspired me at a CLE several years ago. And I had a paradigm shift because of this presentation that they did. And I reached out to him not too long ago. So he's a really innovative, smart thinker. And I reached out to him not too long ago because of where he lives. And I had an issue come up with a detainee. And this person was like, oh, I don't do any of that anymore. All my clients are business clients because they actually pay. And so he's basically out of the game. He's still doing immigration, but he was like not at all interested in even giving me any advice on this detainee which is where he practices. So anyways, yeah, there's definitely pressures to practice a certain type of immigration law. It also occurs to me that in talking about why the left and the right approach this so differently, Liz, you brought up something really interesting, which is fighting these little fights. And I think it's interesting to see how different the stakes are because look at the resources that are put into stopping one deportation. You see community activists and people are tweeting and oh my God, we've got to all call. And Matthew, you've had these cases come up where suddenly a spouse of a client's detained and you spend the next 48 hours doing nothing but that one thing, right? I've also thought recently about how if we gave green cards to everyone who's here, your life would not change at all if you were on the right.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even notice if we did it secretly, right? And suddenly everyone magically, where this is a magic trick, everyone wakes up, they've got a green card in their pocket. Nothing about your life would be different. You'd go to work, you'd be miserable at home, you'd, whatever, but you would feel nothing at all. So for them, there's just no stakes, really. I mean, their stakes are all sort of these hypothetical, replacement theory and generic fear of other people. While on our side, we're fighting for like these really tangible things that take up like enormous amounts of energy.
And it's not just, the 48 hours of trying to halt the deportation, and at least you get the sort of psychic benefit of like being able to visualize a family that is still together because you succeeded. But it's like the 6 hours you spend trying to deal with the MBA because your client's EAD is late in arriving and they're having issues. Like, where's the glory in that? There's none.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
right. Yeah, actually, this is a small complaint from a practitioner, but a lot of the luster has been taken off even our victories, because like a U visa now takes 7 years. In the old days, after about a year of waiting, you'd get this thing and
it's about time.
Yay. Yeah, after 6 years, they think that you're a piece of shit because why did it take so long? And my cousin got hers in 3 days or whatever story they heard, they read on Facebook. And I don't blame them for being like begrudgingly, I'm not holding it against them, because I would feel that way too if it took me forever to get a work permit.
Yep.
But yeah, even the victories these days feel sort of like, ugh, okay.
But it used to make me really happy when I would see these stories like, oh, this person just got their green card, and then the attorney would go through all like, they were in prison for years and all this struggle. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's really nice they got their green card. Now it just kind of makes me mad. It's like, why does it have to be that hard?
Right.
For this person, and this person is probably elated and all that, and I'm happy for them, but it's looking at it holistically, saying like, it shouldn't be this hard, and it doesn't have to be this hard, for sure.
Yep. I had a very funny encounter with an immigration attorney in the United Kingdom, or not so United Kingdom, last year. And he was going through, and there were a lot of things that were very similar, and some of the frustrations he had, I was feeling them right alongside him. And then he got to the part where he said, it's just shocking how under-resourced our system is. It can take 6 weeks for a visa to be determined. And I just started laughing. 6 weeks is unreal.
These are for you. Just kidding.
Well, one thing I did want to kind of touch on before we have to go was the census that just came out. And the census report indicates that we've had the slowest rate of growth since 1940, since the Depression era. So Austin specifically, like one of the main arguments against increased immigration or just immigration is that we have way too many people in this country. We're overcrowded. And we don't have, I think that was Trump's like there's no more room. So when you see that we've only had, I think, a 7% growth, and it's the lowest since 1940, and I'm sure before that, how does that inform us about immigration and the way we should be looking at it?
Yeah, I was watching, when that came out, that was entirely expected. That was what most social scientists who study demography and population expected to happen. That's a normal path for post-industrial countries and economies for population growth to slow over time, and then eventually to potentially even decline in terms of absolute numbers like Japan and Italy faced at one point. So it was quite expected. And I actually rolled over to Numbers USA, one of the 3 Tanton groups that advocates for low population, low immigration, low population. And there's a banner on their website where their director, I won't even mention his name, has this whole warning about the United States approaching 1 billion people, which is absurd. We have less than a third of that, and population is slowing. And it was crickets all day long. You would think that if you spent the last 25 years advocating for low population, the numbers would come out, might bring you some joy. You might be celebrating, look, this is better. They weren't, because it's not really what they're about.
Do they have a new video of them taking gumballs out?
It should be taking gumballs out.
Numbers USA has that. Yeah, gumballs out. They probably won't put that up. We should make one.
Yeah. I have a lot to say about that video. Yeah, population growth is slowing. The total number is still going up, but the rate at which it's growing is slowing, and it will continue to slow for lots of entirely normal social reasons that are entirely expected. In fact, if it was not for immigration, population growth in the United States would actually be negative. So it's actually immigration that's keeping population, even on the positive side. And that's been true for a little while now. And I think if you're thinking about policy change and messaging, Greg Sargento from the Washington Post had a piece where, he's really working through this idea of like, look, this is a great reason to reform our immigration system. There are people coming from Central America who, are coming to the United States. We're treating this as a problem. It should be a solution. There should be a path for people to come. And it should be kind of a no-brainer because this is going to be essential to maintaining things like Social Security and other just people into the workforce, just kind of normal population, economic stuff. This is not radical. This is basic capitalism. This is not even open borders. It's just basic reform. But one of the things that just want to flag for people that are thinking about this, as important as that is, also just taking a little bit of a cautionary note from other countries, you would think that this might open up the possibility for diversity. But in fact, in other countries like Italy, where population has declined and population growth has declined, it actually has prompted a kind of reverse nationalism and racism, where there becomes all these programs to get native born people to have more kids. Right. So all of a sudden, we need women to have more babies. There's programs to encourage women to have children. And those are good. If people are having a family, people deserve the resources, but it also borders on some real stereotyping. And there's a lot of pushback in these countries, in parts of Europe, where women are being sort of talked down to and treated as if they're going to sort of save the nation by having more white children, basically. And so I think we just need to be very cautious as we move forward about how we think about population decline, because it can just prompt another racialized and gendered kind of discourse about who should be having children and whose children counts and all of that.
Immigration meets The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. I haven't seen that, but Matthew's told me all about it.
Oh, I just started
loves that show.
The new season. We watch one. We're trying to just watch one like a night instead of trying to like
stay up till 3 or whatever.
Yeah. It's a great show.
Austin, you said earlier that there are these forces that benefit from the brokenness of the system. Sometimes we drive ourselves crazy thinking like, who could possibly want this? But I know like my congressman is constantly posting one of two things. One, that the people at the border represent a major crisis and a huge problem. And two, we've got to bring more farm workers here because there's this massive need. Like we have a major hole in our economy that needs to be filled with immigrants. Hello. But the system they want is one where you can like sort of keep them in camps and mail them back when they're done working. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like the equation is really obvious, 1 + 1 =, and we just need to get people to see it's not 5, but
what?
Yeah. Anyways, Liz and Austin, thanks for coming on today. Is there anything else you guys wanted to mention before we go or plug?
Just waiting for the merch to arrive, from your show.
Oh, okay. We have merch. Did you order it? Oh, okay.
No, she's expecting free stuff because she was on the show.
Oh,
no, okay. It's fun to get to talk to you guys. It's really such a great show for hearing smart, funny people talk in a knowledgeable way about a subject that almost nobody sounds knowledgeable on out in the broader world. So thanks for doing what you do.
The knowledgeable part is why we have guests.
What show is she listening to?
I don't know. She's confused.
Did she think this is the Immigration Hour?
Lies.
Charles Cook has a different podcast. I think
this is the Radio Lab of Immigration.
Oh, there you go.
High quality.
Liz, do you have a Twitter handle or anything cool you want to?
I'm not on Twitter, not really in any meaningful way. But if people want to cure insomnia through reading law review articles, you can just Google search my name and immigration, and my faculty webpage pops right up.
Sweet. And Austin, you're very active on your Twitter. What's your Twitter?
A.C. Kocher, my last name, Kocher. That same series of letters, if you put it at syr.edu, that's my email. And, I am at TRAC. Lots of people have questions about data, how TRAC works, how they can find things. So anyone is welcome to reach out at any time.
Really important work. So until next time.